All right, we should be good to go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session of community conversations on disability in international context. My name is Sarah Pauling, and I'm going to give us a little bit of a context about community conversation before we go. Actually, one sec, I'm going to actually mute myself on the YouTube stream because I'm actually hearing myself as we go. There we go. All right, that'll work. Okay, so community conversations are a monthly conversation surrounding identity and international context. These are conversations among students and other members of the UW. We try to center constructive, safe, and validating dialogue about different components of identity and intersectionality. And we hope that this will be a space for learning, support, exploration, growth, and respect. Before we get started, I know that our friends at DRS are going to give us a little bit of resource information for students, but before that, I would love to introduce us to all of our panelists who are here today, who after this, the resource portion will be doing a Q&A with us. So I can go ahead and call out people to introduce themselves. Felipe, did you want to start?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Felipe Martinez. I use he, him pronouns, and I work with Sarah at Circle, which is the Center for International Relations and Cultural Leadership Exchange at the UW, at an office that supports international students.
Okay. Vic, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, hey, I am Vic, he, him. I'm from Thailand, and I'm a freshman student here at UW Seattle, and I am on the board for Circle, student board for Circle this year, and work with Felipe, and I totally blind. Yeah.
Okay. And Adiem, why don't you go ahead next?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Adiem, she and her pronouns, and I am the Director of Disability Resources for Students here at the Seattle campus. And I worked on campus at UW for about 12 years, and I'm originally from Eritrea, East Africa. So excited to be here.
And Monique, how about you? Oh, Monique, I think you're muted.
Thanks. I was just saying I'm Monique Chabra. I work with Adiem in the Disability Resources for Students office. I'm an access coordinator there. I've been there for a little over 3 years now. And yeah, I'm of Indian descent. My parents immigrated here in the 70s, and I was born and raised in the States, but very much interspersed in my culture as well.
All right, thank you guys. And my name is Sarah Pauling. I'm the Unite UW manager in the Circle office. I'm going to be our moderator for today. So first, I'm going to turn things over to DRS to give us a little information about resources. And you guys let me know when you want me to click through to the next slide.
Okay. And Sarah, yeah, just let me know on time too. So if I need to like rush things, let me know, or if I need to slow it down. So yeah, just to give everyone a little bit of an overview. So in terms of like the definition of a disability and, you know, the kind of conditions we work with in our office, a disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities for that individual. So it could be activities pertaining to life activities in college, like sleeping, reading, how you learn, how you process information, eating, caring for yourself. And accessible means that individuals with disabilities are able to independently acquire the same information, able to engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services within the same time frame as an individual without a disability, in a way that's substantially equivalent to the ease of use that an individual with a disability without a disability would experience. And then in terms of accommodation, what that means is it's used to describe an alteration of an environment, a curriculum format, or equipment that allows an individual with a disability to gain access to content or to complete assigned tasks. It allows students with disabilities the ability to pursue a regular course of study. So basically, you know, our office exists for a lot of reasons, but there's a civil rights law called the American with Disabilities Act that prohibits discrimination based on a disability. And the Section 504 Rehabilitation Act refers specifically to students in higher education to ensure equal access to education so that there isn't any discrimination based on visible or invisible disabilities. And so our office at the University of Washington is legally responsible to ensure that students receive accommodations in a timely manner. So in terms of our mission in our office, our mission is to ensure access and inclusion for all students with disabilities on the Seattle campus, enrolled in all of our undergraduate, graduate, professional, evening degree, and access programs. And that's true as well for the Bothell and Tacoma campuses. The services that we provide include an interactive accommodation process for students. So that means you're meeting one-on-one with one of us coordinators in the office. Direct access support, which is what I work directly in. So we provide emergent and short-term disabilities. We do drop-in advising for prospective students as well. We have a testing center who administers exam accommodations as a service to instructors and departments who don't have the capacity to test students in their department. We also offer accessible texting technology, which means, having your books converted to PDF and maybe using some computer programs to have text-to-voice software or vice versa. We also offer classroom furniture and relocation options, note-taking support services, and consultation and support for instructors and staff that students might need additional help with. So in terms of how to get started with our office, so in post-secondary education, students need to self-identify to get started with us. So once a student self-identifies, that means that they are willing to create an application with our office to identify as an individual with a disability and let us know some more information about what that disability is. Then we also need some information that verifies the disability, usually through some form of documentation. And from there, a student will meet with one of our DRS coordinators, and we'll go into detail about kind of how their condition is impacting them, where the barriers are, and what specific accommodations we could put in place that might be useful for that student to kind of bridge the gap in terms of the challenges that they're experiencing. And then once the students approve for accommodations, they just activate their accommodations every quarter. They send out their faculty notification letters and have a discussion and a dialogue with their faculty about how to get their accommodation needs met, what that looks like, and all of that. So in terms of how to apply, so you go to our website. On the right-hand side of the website, or if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a purple new student application link. So you just click on that. Fill out the required fields. It just asks general information like your name, your address, student ID number, that kind of thing. And then if you have documentation, whether it's medical documentation or documentation for a mental health condition, you can upload it at that time directly to your account. And then from there, our office reaches out to you to schedule an access planning meeting with one of our coordinators. And there might be some additional tasks that you might need to follow up with, whether it's additional documentation or clarification on some things. So we typically email students or contact them via phone if we need more information. So that's how you get started with us.
Also going to briefly talk about the International Health Insurance Program. I had a chance to speak briefly with Chris Desert, the person who advises for this. If you are an international student at UW and you have the iShip plan, which you should, then iShip will cover the cost of medical visits and also durable medical equipment. So if you need medical equipment to support a disability, that is a cost that they will be able to cover. When you are seeking medical care in general, Hall Health Center and the Ravenna Clinic have the best coverage under this plan. This also covers therapy as well as seeking physical help or a diagnosis. Students can search for an in-network clinics on the LifeWise website, which is linked from the iShip website. But if you are at all confused, they urged you to come speak to them at iShip at their office for help. They have front desk and drop-in advising, the remote services, They have virtual front desk hours on Monday through Friday, 9 to 11 a.m. Just on their website, there's a chat function. And they also have more substantial drop-in advising Mondays and Thursdays, 9 to 11 a.m. They also mention that the LifeWise app is helpful if you don't have an insurance card yet. I know when international students arrive in the US, often they may not immediately have their insurance card, but the app can be helpful in the meantime. And a lot of that is on their website, but at the end of this session, I'll be dropping a lot of these links in the chat so that you have a chance to click through directly as well. I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can move into our question and answer component, our panel component for the day. I want to kind of also let you know as an audience that we are really hoping that you will ask your own questions of the panel. In just a moment, I'm going to drop a questions form into the chat that you can use to submit questions that I'll be monitoring that I can kind of send to the panelists. So we really do encourage audience participation and questions as well. So how I'm going to run this panel portion is that I will ask a question, and then if someone wants to respond, I ask that you use the hand icon in reactions, and then I can call on people in the order that they sort of raise their hand. Not everyone has to answer every question, but that way we can kind of call people out in order. So that being said, one moment while I get that link into the chat. I've got, every time I open the YouTube page, I hear my own voice in my ears from several seconds ago, which is really interesting. Okay, that link is now in the chat, so you should be able to go there now and ask questions if you would like. All right, so my first question for the group. So in your own experience or the experience of the students you interact with, how does disability affect the process of adapting to a new cultural environment?
I guess I'll start first. So I know with a lot of the international students that I speak with, it's you know, it depends on what their cultural background is. Oh, sorry, was I supposed to raise my hand? I just started talking.
You're okay.
Why
Next
don't
time.
we? Okay. So yeah, it depends on their cultural background. I know, you know, a lot of the international students I work with are coming from countries where disability is not a thing, and resources in a higher education may or may not exist. And so even identifying as an individual with a disability is not something that's considered the norm, and maybe not something that they're comfortable with. And so I do have that conversation a lot with students, and it's more just focusing on what the condition is that they're experiencing, because it doesn't really, you know, to each individual, whether they call it a disability or not, that's up to them how they want to identify. But it's really just about how they're being impacted and what the condition is, and just talking in those terms. Because yeah, there's just, you know, in terms of what's available in other countries, this is a concept that doesn't even exist in some places. So.
Thank you. I believe Vic was next.
Yeah, just to be sure, would you mind repeating the question again?
The question is, in your own experience, how does disability affect the process of adapting to a new cultural environment?
Yeah, I think I agree that usually it depends on where you're from. But for most people experiences, I'd imagine, including my own, because America, the US has relatively good disability support, especially in higher education. It will be a change, but it would usually be a positive change. Now, sometimes you have to, being at the UW, for example, being a big place, you have to sort of know where to take your own initiative to go to the DRS and talk to people. But generally, if you learn to speak up and request accommodations and what you need, generally it will be a good experience in terms of also in terms of socially, it tends to be also a positive one, although yes, it will change depending where you're from. The American public is, of course, not perfectly aware about disabilities, but generally, I would say in the city of Seattle here, people are generally quite understanding and helpful. So yeah, so the important thing here is that I guess for most people, you have to know that here it's pretty much by law and expected that if you have disability, you can and you probably should request accommodation and take advantage of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Vip. And I think Felipe was next.
And I appreciate going after Monique and Vic because I kind of like it, talking about the student coming forward and the benefits that come with coming forward to secure the accommodations. So sometimes it's some of the students that we support through Circle and we encourage them to register with DRS, for example. There's hesitancy of coming forward and say, I have this disability and I need support, because the students feel that at the moment they come forward, it's going to be attached to the record, and that record is going to be visible back home in the employment that they seek. So it's about, like, I know I need the support now, and then I'm able to get it, but I also don't want to impact any potential future job opportunities when I go back home. So at that point, it's helping the student understand about FERPA and how, whatever is in your academic record is sealed and no one other than you has access to that record. So please do come forward and then ask for the support or accommodations that you might need, because no one, not even at the university, will be able to know if you have accommodations. And, Monique and Ariam can talk about that. So how like everything in the student record is sealed for that specific purpose to maintain privacy, but also it's only the students and those people that need to know in that regard.
And I think Monique, you had a follow-up comment.
Yeah, just to reiterate, we do have that question come through, and it's one I always appreciate when a student brings up that concern. I think some students maybe feel a little bit afraid to bring up those transparent questions. So I always appreciate when a student brings up that concern, and it's true. I tell them if an employer called our office and wanted to know information about you or anybody outside of the university, we'd be telling them we're not authorized to give any information. Everything is confidential, even amongst, even if a professor wanted to call in and know more information, we wouldn't be authorized to give them that information. So I just to kind of piggyback on what Felipe said, we do keep things confidential, and we always appreciate when that question comes up so we can clarify and let students know.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate that we have sort of a variety of perspectives coming from someone working with international students, a student, and someone working with the RS. So I'm hoping we can have that sort of same breadth of experience in these questions, which is really cool to see. So thank you, guys. So my next question is pretty related to something that I think that Monique brought up at the beginning of this answer, which was, can we talk a little bit about feelings on disability as identity? Do you or the students you work with identify with that framework? So if you consider it to be an identity, sort of an integral part of your own identity, or not, since frameworks for identity and disability vary from country to country. Okay, looks like Monique first, and then we'll have Vic after that.
Yeah, I do, because I, just on that whole idea of disability as identity, I know for some students that can be an incredibly empowered concept and a form of their identity that makes them feel seen, which I think is really powerful. And so there's a spectrum when I think about it, because for other students, that's very far from how they identify. And it's more just that they're moving through life with this condition, whether it's a physical condition, whether it's a mental health condition, and they just recognize that they need supports to be able to reach their full potential in this society. And I tell a lot of students the society is built not to serve the majority of the human population. The human population is a spectrum. And so, to find supports that help you bridge the gap so that you can function your best in a society that doesn't really serve you is really what our office is about. And so, yeah, I do like to gauge. I know with certain students, just kind of normalizing that it's okay if they don't identify as having a disability and they can still use our services. It's more just about utilizing the resources available to them, kind of just in a sense, even if they don't identify as a disability, playing the game, so to speak, to go through the process. You know, they might, maybe the paperwork might call it a disability. That doesn't mean they need to identify as that. It's just a formalized word for it. And just kind of normalizing that for them and just know, you know, letting them know it's more about the condition and the barriers and how we can help support there.
Thank you. Vic, why don't you go ahead?
You know, this is an interesting question because I come from a country, Thailand. A disability is a disability, and in some circles, even something to be pitied on. And now I come here, I see more perspective. I've seen people who consider disability as only divergences and not a disability. I've seen all sorts. Personally, for me, a disability is not a big part of my identity. It holds the same status as me having a dust allergy, but obviously much more bigger consequences. I just make do with it. It's not particularly empowering or degrading to myself. Personally, that's how I look at it. But I think I've seen many views regarding disability from the more typical disabled view to a more divergent sort of new way of thinking. But I think what's important after all is what Monique said. No matter how you look at it, you can use these resources. If you look at disability as a not a hindrance, but just as a rocky fact of life, like me, well, use it. The resources are made to make your life easier, and you deserve it. You pay for the college. Now, if you view disability as a divergent, well, still, we have tools in life to make our lives easier. Go ahead and use it. Don't be ashamed about it or feel like you're different or, going out of your way to do it. You deserve it, and it is there for you to be used. Yeah.
Vic, I love that when you said, you deserve it and they are there for you to use. And that's totally true, especially the fact that in your case, you're paying tuition. But in general, using the resources available to you, that's great. I think Ariam had her hand up first.
Oops, if I can unmute. Yeah, that's awesome, Vika. I was going to say the same thing as not even deserve it, but like it's your right. It's legal. It's a legal right here in the US, even if it's not elsewhere. So you're here now and it is your legal right to be served well and with accommodations, right? The other thing I was thinking of was, every time there's a social movement or a political movement, right, in the world, I think the expectation for a lot of people is that it is important to their identity, but they're trying to represent everybody, but it doesn't represent everybody. But the group of people who really feel like, right, they wanted to represent and like move the change and the dial on this, didn't care if you care about it as a part of your identity or not. Was that like there is a legal expectation and we should really protect and take care of people with disabilities, and ultimately the goal that we shouldn't discriminate people with disabilities, especially, right? So so creating laws and like advocating and using kind of their voice to make the social movement didn't care if you choose to believe it. It was to say that this is a legal expectation. It should be a right. And it's just like a good thing to do because we should care about people and the fact that everybody is different and we all have different abilities. It doesn't make it like Vic said, there's nothing about it that degrades you. Everybody is different, but we should protect people. And that, like, again, it's the protected class in America. So I think that there are people who can choose to really identify with that and want that to be a part of their identity and not. And everybody still gets the service, like Vic said. So.
Thank you. How about Felipe first and then Monique?
The one thing I will add is that in some cases, in supporting students that arrive at the university with undiagnosed conditions, and then when something at the university in their experience triggers, or that's when students are confronted with the notion that, hey, I might have a disability. So at that point, the identity, and it goes back to what Monique said about being liberating, what sometimes you would tell students, hey, you should get a test because you might have this, and then that diagnosis been liberating. It's like, like, oh, I've been dealing with this my whole life and I didn't know what it was. So how, supporting the student navigate that new aspect of their identity to be successful in the college setting, to going back to what Vic was saying about helping navigate and remind them that the resources are there. But on the same time, I'm going to add the concept of some students, for example, that may have a temporary disability, and also they themselves be hesitant about reaching for accommodations. So I've had examples where students, they were in an accident, that they're right-handed, and then they're no longer able to take notes, but they still want to be a student. It's like reminding them there are some of the things that you could have access to because you're a student, and then the students don't want to be seen as a burden, but reminding them, hey, if you can write, how are you going to take notes, and how are you going to be successful as a student? So helping them reframe that, even though that identity of being a student with disability may be temporary, at the end of the day, it's kind of like how to navigate, how to help them understand that, their support can still exist, or exist, I should say.
It's a really good point, Felipe, especially bringing temporary disability into sort of the focus as well. Monique, you had something?
Yeah. Oh, now I have more. Yeah, because I think Felipe touched on some really good points. Vic and Audium did too. I'll start with what Felipe talked about, and then I'm going to backtrack a little bit. But it made me think. I just lost my train of thought. As you were talking about the temporary disabilities, and I lost my train of thought, but I'll come back to that actually. So let me jump up to what Vic was saying, because there's this image that I like to use. We talk, is it gonna show up? No, it won't. Let me try changing here. I think it might be because of my background. But it's a really good image that I feel shows kind of how to conceptualize it. Is it going to show up here? Yeah. So do you see where it says equity, right? And everybody's standing on a box that fits the size so that they can see over the fence, but the box sizes are different, right? Because each person's height is different. Like this is a experience where there's not equity. This one is what equity looks like. And so we talk about this picture a lot in our office, because it really is, in terms of like the spectrum of human functioning, it really is a matter of like, people are different heights, and some people can't see over the fence while others can. And equity is about giving people the right size box so that everybody can at least have access to see what's happening on the other side of the fence. And so that image is always kind of what's been ingrained in my mind in terms of my work with students, and equaling the playing ground. Because you do have a right to see the world as much as everybody else does. And even the idea of a condition being a disability, or a condition being called a condition, is only called that based on norms in the United States, which it's just a difference in human functioning. There's a whole spectrum of human functioning. So I feel like a lot of the times we can feel like we're being labeled as having this condition or having this thing, but these are all based off of subjective scientific measures that are just used for language purposes, but it's really just about like equaling the playing field, given that we're all functioning on different degrees. And I can't remember, Felipe, what I was there was something you said that I wanted to speak to, but I can't remember now. So
students been feeling like they're a burden.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Yeah. No, I was thinking just culturally, I think for a lot of immigrant cultures and a lot of minority cultures, that's a common theme. Thanks, Felipe. That's exactly what I wanted to touch on, is that it's hard to ask for help. It's hard as humans in general to ask for help, but I think specifically amongst minority cultures, it's hard to ask for help. And it does feel burdensome. And I would challenge students to redefine what they consider strength to be, because strength is actually recognizing that you're, being strong enough to stand in your vulnerability and ask for help and support while you're standing in that vulnerability actually requires a great deal of strength. And I feel like that's what true strength and resilience is really about. And so I would ask students to kind of reframe how they define strength and not really define it based on how our society defines it, but more so on advocating for themselves and empowering themselves in the ways they need, which first starts with recognizing where we need support and where we need help.
Thank you for that, Monique. I'm going to go to Vic next.
Yeah, just want to add short. Forgot. Should be pretty obvious, but identities are spectrum, I would say, and not binary. It's not like it's my identity or not my identity. The fact that I like barbecue flavored chips is as much is an identity, and my political stance is also an identity. One is probably more important than the other, however. So it's a spectrum, and I've met a lot of people with disability who stands on different their disabilities stands on different point of that spectrum. For me, is on the lower end, on the smaller side of things. But as everyone sort of says already, wherever you are on that identity stands, I think you have a way. You can have a philosophy that perfectly allows you to request and take those rights of yours to use as accommodation, and that's no problem. Doesn't matter where you stand identity-wise.
I really like the mindset we've referred to a couple times of regardless on how you consider this as part of your identity or otherwise, like the resources are there either way to kind of, I think Monique said play the game, but to kind of go in and use them because they are present regardless of kind of how you feel about sort of the social aspect or the socialized aspect. I want to go ahead and ask another question if that's all right with you guys. And this one is a little more abstract, so it's okay if you want to take a sec to think about it, but who have you, or I suppose the students you work with, had advocate for you? And then what are barriers that you face for advocating for yourself? Ariam?
Can I just clarify, the first part of the question was, who do you have advocate for you? Is that what you said, Sarah?
Correct, yeah. Who have you had advocate for you? Yeah.
Or maybe for your students, Monique, in this case.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say what's great is, like Monique had just pointed out, is we want students to think about advocating for themselves, but we also understand they are a community, and especially when we think about immigrant and minority populations, we're so community focused and family and like group focused. So we totally understand when there are other people, and it's actually great that there are other people advocating. So we sometimes have parents advocating for students all the time, which is great. I just had this week a doctor reach out to me on behalf of their student, and that doesn't happen often, but I was like, wow, thank you. It's hard to get a hold of you as a doctor usually. So I was like, I'll take it. Now I got to find time with them. But so I think, and we've had faculty, we've had staff, we've had advisors, sometimes even friends, reach out to their friend and say, do you know this thing exists? Let me walk you to DRS and let's do this together. So I think for us, really anyone can advocate. What gets tricky once you're here getting services is that some of the advocating you have to do is for yourself. So for instance, we might give you accommodations in DRS and a faculty is not doing it. That is not okay. And you definitely need to reach back out and let us know so that we can intervene and make sure that's happening, right? So if you don't tell us, we don't know, and then we can't do anything. So it doesn't help. And so there's a space where definitely self-advocacy has to play out, because you're the one getting the accommodation or not getting it, or being hurt or benefiting, right? So a lot of times we want students to make sure they know and they feel like they can advocate to other people, like their faculty, for themselves. But if they don't feel comfortable, to reach back out to us so we can help also advocate for them. So we are very much a space of advocacy for students, or ensuring accommodations are happening. That is actually our bottom line. If we gave it to you, we got to ensure the university is doing it. And so we will follow up and fix that if not.
Thank you. I think we'll go Vic and then Felipe.
well, this might not be like a direct or big advocacy effort, but I will give some examples that I think are cool. So, as a blind person, there are some sports or activities that people don't expect you to do, especially at home. Now, my parents are pretty, as far, they're pretty ill, but also just understandably they're worried about their son. Now here I have two very cool experiences. One is that is a family friend casually inviting me to a ski trip in Idaho last Christmas, and one of them taught me how to ski, even though he had never experienced with any blind person or blind skiing. The instructor at the resort also took on the challenges of teaching me. So those are good vibes moments that show people around me, my parents, people on the slopes, of ski slopes, that things like this happen. And also the other one, my friend here, member of the archery club, one day she suddenly texted me and say, "Hey, you want to try archery?" I want to try setting up the accommodations such as targeting devices for your hands to touch and stuff, and I want you to try it because it should be good. I went there and it was cool, and a lot of people saw me do it. I think that they thought it was cool, and yeah, those are some experiences here that I think is great. Again, the public is not. It's not like the public has perfect awareness of advocacy and disability, but I've met some very good experiences here, and it's kind of heartwarming, I guess. And I have to lastly emphasize self-advocacy is probably the most important. Tell people my personal advice, only my personal advice, because I am sort of a moderate politically, socially. Don't go hard on people. Slowly tell people around you how you do things, how I use my cane, for example, how best for you to guide me, what words to refer to stuff. For example, when you're talking to me, you don't have to say listen to movie. You can say just watch movie. Those little things really change perspective of how people who you have to remember, a lot of them never met persons with disabilities in their life. So these little nuggets of fun facts and the way we prefer to do stuff can, in long term, slowly condition them and give them the tools and understanding to better understand people with disability in the future and give them platform and understanding. And I think all these little efforts of self-advocacy is as important as going to faculty and going to DRS and requesting your rights.
Thank you, Vic. Felipe, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think Vic summed it beautifully. The one thing I will just add, I mean, we already talked about self-advocacy and that's important, but also, and then tagging along to what Vic said about, for someone that is on the holds their access to the resource, just that importance to listen and then not speak for people, but actually allow for people to speak for themselves. So an invitation sometimes that we give to our colleagues when supporting international students, in an effort to be wanting to help, the first instinct is to translate resources to the student's native language, right? But I think as an example of speaking for someone, it is like the service speaking for international students and saying, this is what I need. When in reality, it's more about you're just listening to the students and be like, are the words that I'm using make sense? Do you have a concept of what we're supposed to do? And when students themselves tell you, this is what we need, it will make it easier for students to have access to those resources. So that way, when we listen, we're able to remove any unintentional barriers that we might have to be able to better serve students.
Thank you, Felipe. That's a good point. Monique, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I agree 100% with Felipe and Vic. Both those examples that you provided are just heartwarming and beautiful, and I'm glad you have people in your life who are supporting you and like having new experiences that you wouldn't have otherwise had access to. So that was just really beautiful to hear you share those stories. And yeah, I think speaking to what Felipe mentioned, like listening to students, hearing their story, hearing where they're at is such a powerful experience. And I find, we were in this diversity training last week, and I just kept thinking, like, when we're working with faculty, when we're helping a student advocate with faculty, just remembering that our students are humans first and foremost. They're humans going through this university system, living their life, and what's happening in their academics is a fraction of what's happening in the rest of their life. And oftentimes what's happening in the rest of their life is what's impacting their academics. And so just kind of keeping that lens, which is, I always have this mental health lens when I'm working with students. And so I'm even just thinking, I know it's easy to say, advocate for yourself, ask for help, do these things, but really what a human's going through when it comes to that is they're struggling, and asking for help is the hardest thing to do when you're in the midst of struggle. And I brought up vulnerability before, but I think it's a very vulnerable process, to recognize you're struggling, to recognize that you're not keeping your head above water. And then to be able to ask for help, like stick your hand above the water in the process, it's hard. It's really hard. And that's why I always say, like, any student who gets their foot in the door, who's able to set foot in the door in our office, whether it's, remotely at this point or in person, it's a huge step. And that's the one thing that gets the momentum going, gets the ball rolling. But it's just that, like, one toe in the door that gets the ball rolling with it. And that's the hardest part about it. But I do think it's very powerful just to hear a student's story and to just encourage them to get resources. Yeah, it's a lot harder to do in action.
Thank you. I'm going to ask us one more question before I go to the question I have in the chat. But firstly, this may be more of a DRS question, but so we've talked about students not seeking support or being newly diagnosed. Some students may still be wondering, so sort of what counts, quote unquote, to give you accommodations with DRS? So what sort of things can you help with? Excuse me, help with?
Yeah, Adiam, do you want to speak to this, or do you want me to? I'm happy to.
I was going to be like, this is a Monique's thing, but I can speak a little, and then you can tag team.
Oh, okay. I'll speak to it too. But
we, I mean, normally, kind of what Monique talked about a little bit earlier, is like letters from doctors, letters from therapists, right? Letters from any healthcare provider. If students have had previous accommodations anywhere, we definitely will look at that and help students think about accommodations, whether that was in their home country, whether it was high school or another university or college here as well. We in the time of COVID has been really unique, because we know that was difficult for people to do, and then we had students all over the world, and so sometimes we have that come into where students will have documentation maybe in another language, or we've had documentation maybe for students while they're remote still and trying to figure out like what might happen. So we've been really trying to be mindful and flexible about students not being able to get in to see a provider. Maybe they're not here physically. We've obviously, telehealth has changed a little bit with therapy, but even if students are in another state, the therapist or the counseling center at UW wasn't able to support them because of licensing for state issues. So really trying to be flexible with students. That's like, what do you have? What can you get us? Let's talk through it. At the end of the day, even if a student has nothing, they can still come in the door. We'll have a conversation. It might limit what we would be able to provide, but definitely want to make a space to, like Monique said, just get in the door, have a conversation with us. You can set up a meeting. Any student can set up a meeting with Monique, even if they're not in DRS yet as a prospective student. And those are questions she gets all the time. And so being able to look at, what do you have? What don't you have? Why don't you have it? When can you get it? Can we help you find a resource to get it? And then, we can work from there to figure out what's next. So really anything someone has, we will take, even if it's a picture of a prescription bottle, and we will figure out and work out like, what is it that's possible that we can do? Monique, go.
Yeah. So absolutely 100% what Adiam said. What I feel like when I'm working with students, I'm kind of thinking about, okay, what's the easiest route first? And that's what I want them to try first. Plan A is going to be the easiest route. Plan B will be the next option, and so on. So typically for students, if they have no documentation, the easiest route for them is to submit like a self-report. We're taking self-reports where we can look into temporary accommodations based on that self-report while they're working on getting their documentation. And the way we do temporary accommodations is we approve it for the current quarter plus 1 quarter out. So that buys them anywhere from like 3 to 6 months to get more permanent documentation or more substantial documentation if we need it. And so I will typically tell students to go that route in the meantime, because it at least gets their, once they have the application and at least the self-report at the bare minimum, it gets them in the queue and gets the ball rolling with their stuff. A lot of our students, I will suggest any documentation that you have. So even if it's an aftercare summary report, let's start with that, because ultimately anything they can upload to their account will get them in our system, we'll get them assigned to an access coordinator. And then if we need more documentation beyond that, we can reach out to them and get it, but at least their application's moving forward in the queue with that. And I think also another note I want to make is sometimes students, I've had a lot of students who don't know if what they even have qualifies as a disability or as something that's diagnosable. And so I would encourage you, if you're struggling, any student who's struggling could benefit from reaching out to our office to see, is this something that maybe I could use resources for through your office? I've had that conversation several times with students, and it's worth exploring and worth having the conversation with someone who can kind of guide them through that process. And everybody has had the experience where they're struggling at some point in their college experience. And so you never know if it might be temporary accommodations that you could qualify for or permanent ones. But just if you're in that place of struggling, that's your sign to like, oh, let me reach out to DRS.
And I'm gonna add one thing real quick, Sarah. So I know we just talked about the insurance, the SHIP insurance everyone has too, hopefully is Hall Health. If the students go into Hall Health and get seen for anything, they can, like Monique said, use their after visit summary, or if they get somebody there to write us documentation. So Hall Health does write documentation. They have sent us things. So just a heads up for students that we know, at least international students are potentially using that as our first resource. They do write documentation for us, for students.
Thank you guys for this very helpful information. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can I just add a small thing too? We have a healthcare provider form on our website that it's a PDF form. Like students can send that directly to their provider if they know who to send that to. Like, oh, I have a provider, I just don't know what the heck to tell them to fill out. Just send the healthcare provider form to them, have them fill it out, send it back to you. That's typically sufficient. And that kind of you don't need to know what information you need. They just answer those questions and then give it back to you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask this question in the chat. How can I best find people who will advocate for me in the university? Monique, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, that's a good question. How can I best find people who would advocate for me in the university? I think a lot of times you find people through a trail. And so if you have one person, whether it's an academic advisor, a professor, whoever you feel most comfortable approaching, who you feel, just most comfortable approaching, who you've had, good experiences with in the past, start there. Because a lot of times professors, academic advisors, advisors in other offices that are maybe more student-facing offices will, even if they can't help you and don't know the answers, they'll be able to connect you with the person who does. So I would say to reach out first to one of the professionals or staff members on campus you feel most comfortable approaching, see what resources they know about from there. And if you don't have anyone who you feel comfortable approaching on campus, then call any one of our offices, call the DRS office. Even if it's a financial aid question, we may not know the answer, but we do know how to connect you with someone who can help you in financial aid, for example. So any office on campus, I would say if you don't know anyone, reach out to any of the student support offices and they'll be able to guide you along that trail to the right person or to the right office.
All right, thank you. Felipe, why don't you go ahead and then we'll do Vic.
I think everything that Monique said is right on point. Just talk to someone that you trust to be able to find the resource. The one thing I will encourage students to think about is that if you feel comfortable reaching out to someone and it's a sensitive topic, try to be somewhat specific. So that way, once you're specific, then that person will be able to give you the appropriate referral. And then there could be a difference between someone giving you a list of resources or actually walking you to the resource. But going back to my original point about confidentiality and FERPA within the university. So let's say, for example, a student comes in and says, this is what I'm experiencing, do you know someone that might be able to help me? I could tell the student, okay, here's the counseling center information, here's the RS, these are the resources that will be able to help you. But as an administrator, I won't even know whether or not the student went to the counseling center or the RS. That's how confidential their information is. So it is important to know about, and that's why it goes to a little bit of specificity to try to figure out, okay, when the student is talking to me, what will be the best appropriate resource to send them, as opposed to sending them to a place and that place may not necessarily be the right place and they go to find another spot. So that specificity for me helps me give them the right information right off the gate.
Thank you, Felipe. Go ahead, Vic.
Yeah, of course, the first will be very useful to you is the DRS folks. All of them are decent people, very decent folks. Go to them, even though they might not have your specific information or point to the right people. Circle is very helpful as well. Circle and International Student Services, especially if it's about international student things, very helpful people as well. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind, and I'll be very honest here, is that if you talk to administrators, you might not be able to, because of FERPA, this is one of the things that FERPA will get in a way, they won't be able to, for example, Felipe can't suddenly tell anyone, hey, Vic is blind, talk to him. They're not allowed to do so. As Felipe, is that right? Just wanting to make sure. Or Monique?
Yeah, no, that is correct.
I think so.
Yeah, they're not to sort of, connect people on a whim like that. So, but there are many ways to, soon enough you will discover and there are some that I will mention. I know UW has a disability advocates or student organization. I've never actually met them, but I've seen their sites and their page before. It looks active. And also, don't forget that the organization that is related to your disability. One cool thing about America is that there's got association for everything. So, for example, I come here, I needed cane training. Well, I contact the Lighthouse of the Blind for Seattle. So, they have cane training, they have vocational training, they sell accessibility devices. So Seattle is a big city. Try and find the association or a group of people or advocates that is related to your disability, and that way you will be able to get help as well. And there's of course the decent for people with disabilities. You can find resources there too. So there's quite a few. Yeah.
Thank you. And it looks like Monique, you had a follow-up as well.
Yeah, just with what Vic was saying, there is a student disability organization on campus. It's called the Student Disability Commission. So if you Google UW Student Disability Commission, they have an Instagram account, and they also have their website linked on their Instagram account. And their Instagram is ASUWSDC. So I know I've actually gotten that question from a few students recently. So that's good information, Vic, to mention that.
Thank you, guys. The chat forum for the Q&A is still open if anyone wants to slide in any last questions. But in the meantime, since we're close to the end of our hour, I wanted to ask our panelists if they had any final thoughts they wanted to add or to convey to the audience. Go ahead, Felipe.
Yeah, so, we talked about seeking the resources. We talked about making sure that the students come forward to be able to get the support that they need. The one thing I would just ask students to also be mindful about is that sometimes, because of the nature of the university, the nature of higher education administration, sometimes some steps might seem repetitive and they might have to do things a little differently. So for example, if an international, for example, for an international student to be able to be in compliance with their visa, they have to be a full-time student. But if they have a disability, for example, or a temporary accommodation, that where they need to go part-time, they have through ISS, they have what they call a reduced course form that they need to do. So that's to be in compliance with the federal government. Now, DRS also provides an opportunity for a student to go part-time, but it's not necessarily for compliance with the US government. It's a service that they provide for students for a totally different reason. So that's just an example of how two administrative processes can have the same name, but could be totally different things. So it's very important for students to pay attention, and then also encourage them not to be frustrated, is that we're not asking them to do things twice, but because sometimes things are done to be in compliance with two totally different entities. So just to keep that in mind.
Thank you. Vic, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, just to add on to Felipe, the truth here is that UW is a big university. There might be some tape. Also, UW has a lot of very helpful and useful organizations and departments that work in tandem. We have Circle, we have ISS, we have DRS, we have all those resources that are pasted in our chat. And I think they all, if you go to each of them and you have a little patience, and also spare some time. Here's the important thing: spare some time. Don't do things on the last minute, because there are a lot of people in this process and things get cluttered. So take your time, do things ahead of time, and you should be all right. And also, people are helpful. Go on Reddit, go on Discord, ask where can I find this and this resources. Most likely you're gonna get a good answer. So my important message here is, if you know what you need, look it up on Google, add the word, type what you need, add the word UW after it. You're most likely gonna find something, and be patient with the process. And I think overall you're gonna be rewarded with a pretty fulfilling college experience, because they really got everything for you here. Yes, thanks.
That's still how I find things in this university, Googling and putting UW after it. Monique, go ahead.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how much Google is answering our questions for all of us nowadays. Yeah, I wanted to say, Audium, thanks for putting all these links in the comments. You are like the link queen for all things in our office too. So, and then, yeah, I just would encourage students to, there's a lot of information being thrown at you as a student, and it's okay if you call, for example, if you call our office and you maybe absorb 20% of the information you've chatted with us about, and you need to ask the same questions over again. Call us and ask us the same questions again. That's absolutely fine. And I would want any student to feel comfortable doing that with any student support office on campus or with their academic advisor on campus. It's a lot of information, and we don't expect you guys to be experts on the information for each of these offices. So just know it's a lot. You can always ask the same question over again. You can set up another appointment with the same person to make sure you're understanding things, or to see if you missed anything. So I would just encourage students to do that, because we want to help. We're here to help, and we're here to cover the information as much as is needed. So
thank you. Is that everything? Any final comments? No? All right, well, in that case, I want to thank you guys for coming and being on this panel with me here today. I feel like I've learned an awful lot, and I really appreciate that we'll have this, on the Circle YouTube page to link and to have as a resource for students. And yes, thank you for coming and giving your time, the audience as well. Just so you know, we are the Circle office and DRS, who, we've kind of gone through a little bit the resources available. But if you are interested in learning more, I'm going to put some links in the chat for a few of the other things we've talked about today, although Audium has been great about getting links to me that I've also put in the YouTube chat. So with that, Let me just send those and give us a second. Okay, there we go. All right. Well, have a good night, everybody.